Picture the most dangerous room in England, not a battlefield, not a plague ward. A warm room with a fire and tapestries and a man the size of a church door sitting in a chair, built specially to hold him, because no ordinary chair can anymore. Now fill that room with silence because the man is in pain. And when this man is in pain, people die. Add the smell of the wound in his leg, which never heals and never stops leaking, a smell like meat forgotten in summer. Add courtiers along the walls who have learned to breathe without being heard, and add one more man, a stooped man in a green and yellow coat past 50, with bad knees and a pig's bladder on a stick, whose entire job, whose only job, is to walk up to the most dangerous human being in Europe and make fun of him, to his face, on purpose. That's the court of Henry VIII in the year 1546, the richest rooms in the kingdom and the most frightened. A place where a duke can be arrested at dinner and a laundress can serve the same family for 40 years. A place where you could watch a man made an earl in the morning and watch the same man's head come off before the next quarter day. And through it all, threading between the terror and the gold like a needle through cloth, goes the old fool, the jester, the one man in England allowed to say the things that put other men in the tower. But here's the question nobody at court will say out loud. The question we're going to live inside tonight. What happens to that man when he gets old? When the knees give out? When the jokes come slower? When the king who laughed at him for 20 years starts dying himself? A fool has no land, no trade, no guild, no pension written anywhere. A fool is not even paid exactly. A fool is kept, the way a spaniel is kept. So what happens to a kept man when the keeping stops? We're going back there tonight to find out. Not as tourists gawking at the famous beheadings. We're living it. 1 year, one boy, one old jester, everything they would have seen, smelled, heard and survived. So, I make these history stories, and honestly I have no clue if anyone actually sleeps to them or if you're all just weirdos who like hearing about leg ulcers, dried peas, and men whose job description includes insulting a king who killed 2 of his own wives. Either way, subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your eyes open to darkness. For a moment, maybe half a second, you've forgotten where you are. Then it hits you. The smell. It's not just one smell. It's layers. Tallow smoke from the candle that gutted out sometime after midnight, greasy and sharp at the back of your throat. Old rushes on the floor beneath your truckle bed, sweet at the top and sour underneath. Because rushes are changed by the calendar and not by the nose. River mud, because the tide is out and the Thames is breathing its low-tide breath through every gap in the shutters, mud and weed and tar from the shipyards downstream at Deptford. Dog, warm and close, because one of the king's spaniels has abandoned the king's hearth again and wormed in against your legs in the night. And underneath it all, the smell of a body that has worn the same shirt for 6 days, which is your body, and your shirt, and your 6 days. Welcome to Greenwich Palace, on the south bank of the Thames, in March of 1546. You're lying on a truckle bed, a low wooden frame on wooden wheels, pulled out across the doorway of a small chamber in the eastern range of the palace, above the paved court 2 floors below the rooms where the King of England is also at this hour not sleeping. You sleep across the doorway because that is what you are. You are the door. Your name is John Carter. You're 14 years old, and you arrived here 5 months ago in October from Much Wenlock in Shropshire, with exactly 1 change of linen, a good pair of shoes your mother cried over the cost of, and a letter from the prior's steward saying you were honest and could hold your tongue. Back home, Everyone said a boy who could hold his tongue would do well at court. They weren't wrong. They just didn't say why. Your work is the man in the bed on the other side of the door, the man you can hear now through the boards, breathing in the particular way he breathes when his knees have been aching all night and he's been lying still, arguing with them. Long breath in, held. Let go slowly, so the mattress ropes don't creak, because he thinks you're asleep and he doesn't want to wake you. His name is William Summers, Will Summers, the King's Fool. And this morning, before the palace is even properly light, you already know two things. You know his knees are bad because of the breathing, and you know that tonight the king has commanded a private supper with music and mirth, and that Master Fowler said yesterday, in the flat voice he keeps for things that frighten him, that if the fool cannot stand before the king, the fool cannot serve the king. He said it to the ledger in front of him, not to you. That made it worse. And when I say fool, I need you to understand what that word means in 1546. This isn't a clown at a fair, tumbling for pennies. This is an office. A place in the royal household, like the office of the man who keeps the king's hawks, or the man who warms the king's shirts. Will Summers has held it for 21 years, since 1525, when a wool merchant named Richard Fermer brought him up to court and presented him to the king the way you'd present a rare falcon. Another Shropshire man, as it happens, which is half the reason Will asked for you when the household needed a boy for him. He heard your vowels across a courtyard flat and wide as home, and said he'd take the lad who talked like a proper Christian. If the fool cannot stand, the fool cannot serve. You heard the ledger take that down. You have been hearing it all night. Because here is the thing about a fool's place. It exists exactly as long as it amuses one man. There is no charter. There is no guild of jesters with a hall and a chapel and funeral money for widows. There is a line in the household books, and lines in books can be struck through. You've seen Master Fowler strike through lines. He wets the quill twice and does it slowly. You need to get up. You slide out from under the blanket into cold that grabs your ankles like a hand. The floorboards have been drinking the river damp all night. The spaniel lifts its head, decides you're not the king, and goes back to sleep in the warm hollow you've abandoned, which tells you everything about where you stand in the order of this palace. You feel for the water basin on the stool by the wall. The water in it is 2 days old and smells faintly of the pewter, and when you splash your face, the cold of it cracks you awake like a slap. There's a skin of grit at the bottom. Water is carried up here in leather jacks from the conduit in the great court, and you are the one who carries it, and you didn't yesterday, because yesterday went wrong from dinner onward, and so this morning you wash in Tuesday. Your clothes are where you left them, folded on the chest because Will makes you fold them. A shirt of coarse linen, softened by wear into something almost kind. Hose that need mending at the left knee, a thing you keep meaning to ask Nan in the laundry to show you how to do properly instead of the puckered scars you make yourself. Shoes still holding the shape of your feet, leather cold as chapel stone when you push in. And over it all, your livery coat. And this is the one thing you own that matters. It's blue-grey wool, decent cloth, given you at All Hallows from the king's wardrobe because you serve a man of the king's chamber. It marks you. Not a scullion, not a woodyard boy, not one of the 100 and more children who turn spits and carry ash in the deep parts of this palace. A servant of the fool is still a servant of the king's own fool. Appearances matter in this place. They matter more than almost anything, and cost more than they matter. Through the door, the mattress ropes finally creak. long and deliberate, like a ship taking the tide. He's given up pretending. You knock once and go in. The chamber is small, smaller than the word chamber deserves. A bed, a chest, a stool, a window of thick greenish glass with the shutter half open, and the grey river light coming in like water into a boat. Will Summers is sitting on the edge of the bed with his bare feet on the boards and his hands on his knees, exactly like a man about to stand up, which he is not doing. You've never once been told how old he is. You asked him your first week, and he said he'd been born on a Thursday and misplaced the rest. Past 50, Nan says. Old is what that means here. Old for this work, which lives in the body as much as the mouth. He's long and folded looking, stooped in the shoulders in a way that Nan swears he wasn't 15 years ago, with a face like a bad harvest. All hollows, grey stubble coming in patchy where he hasn't been shaved since Friday, and eyes that are the whole argument. Quick brown eyes, watchful, already laughing at something an hour before the rest of him gets there. The face of a man who has spent 21 years reading one enormous, dangerous other face for a living, the way a pilot reads a river. Knees, he says, by way of good morning. Both. The left is honest pain. The right is only jealous of the attention. He flexes his toes against the floorboards and winces. Fetch the coat, John. The coat hangs on its peg like a flag of a country nobody else belongs to. Green and yellow, quartered, the fool's colours, wool gone soft and thin as an old man's hair. The elbows are worn down to a shine you can nearly see light through. The hem is grease-darkened, and there's a burn scar on the left forearm from a Christmas 12 years gone. Some business with a flaming pudding you've heard 3 versions of, each with a different bishop in it. The king's wardrobe has offered him new cloth 4 times. Fowler has the warrants half drawn. Will refuses every time with the same words, and he says them again now as you help his arms into the sleeves and feel how carefully he keeps his balance while you do it. This coat knows the king, he says. A new coat would have to be introduced. At my age, you just make new friends before supper. Then the bladder. It lives on the chest, and it is exactly what it sounds like. A pig's bladder, scraped and dried to a cloudy yellow like horn tied to a painted stick. Inside it are 3 dried peas, not 4, not a handful. 3. He counts them every morning by shaking it once beside his ear, a short dry rattle like bones in a cup, and if a pea ever splits or wears through, he replaces it that same day from a little store he keeps knotted in a rag at the bottom of the chest. Because, he says, a fool's rattle going quiet in front of the king is an omen, and omens are the one thing he refuses to supply this court. He shakes it now. Once. Rattle. Satisfied, he hands it to you to carry and holds out his arm for the stairs. And then there's the stool, which is yours to bring down after. A low 3-legged stool of oak, black with age, plain as a milking stool, and worth more than everything else in this room together, because of where it's allowed to be. It sits by the king's own fire, and Will Summers sits on it. Nobody else in England sits in the presence of the king uninvited. Dukes stand, bishops stand, ambassadors of the emperor stand until their knees sing. The fool sits by the fire like the fire's own dog. Because the fool is not really there, you see. The fool doesn't count. That stool is the whole strange treaty of his life made into furniture, and part of your work is carrying the treaty behind him from palace to palace, and you have carried it through gates where lords took off their hats to pass. Getting him down the stairs takes time now. That's the thing nobody sees at supper. They see the fool skip the last 2 steps into the hall, and they don't see the quarter hour before. This, here, the landing taken in stages, his hand gripping your shoulder hard enough to leave the ghost of itself. His breath counted. The left leg lowered like a barrel eased down a plank. Halfway, he stops. Below in the court, a door bangs, voices, the first wood cart of the morning grinding over cobbles. He looks at nothing, gathering the leg for the next flight, and says, conversational, the way other men say it looks like rain. Do you know what I am paid, John? You do, actually, near enough, because Fowler's ledger lies open sometimes. But you know better by now than to spoil a question he's asked on a stare. No, sir. Nothing, he says cheerfully. There's meat and drink in it, and this coat, and wood for that miserly little fire, and a mattress, and once a year the king fills my hand, and it's more than a parson sees in 5. But wage, fee, wage set down and owed to me at law, nothing. A fool is kept, John. Kept, not paid. He starts the leg down. A carpenter is paid. Paid men can be owed. Kept men can only be fed. Or not. The last step takes his whole attention, so the words just stay there, sitting on the cold landing with you, while the rattle hangs quiet in your hand, and somewhere above, over the river, the first bell of the morning begins. The bell is the chapel bell, thin and businesslike. The great bells that used to answer it are gone. There was a friary right against the palace wall here. Observant Franciscans, grey friars, the king's own favourites once. Henry himself was christened in their church. So was his daughter Elizabeth. And in 1538 the house was emptied like a cupboard. The friars scattered or worse, and now the church stands right there against the tilt-yard, stone silent, its bells taken down for the metal. You pass its wall every morning. Pigeons have it now. Will never looks at it, which is how you know he does. Because this palace remembers everything, that's the thing about Greenwich. Placentia, the old people still call it, the pleasant place. Duke Humphrey of Gloucester built the first house on this bend of the river back in 1433, more than a century ago. And the king's grandmother's husband, the 7th Henry, pulled most of it down and built it up again in red brick between 1500 and 1506. 5 ranges around courtyards, a riverfront 200 paces long with the tower in the middle, so the kings could stand in glass and watch their ships ride at anchor. The king was born here in June of 1491, in a chamber over there in the Queen's Range. He was christened in that dead friary church. He was married to his first wife here, and to his 4th. When he wants to feel like a young man, he comes to Greenwich, because at Greenwich he was one. There's an armoury across the tilt-yard where German craftsmen he imported in 1515 still hammer out armour for a body the armour has to keep being let out for, and a tilt-yard where he broke lances when he could still be lifted into a saddle. And the whole place, brick and glass and green park rising behind it to the hill, is a portrait of a man this court is forbidden to remember out loud. You go first to the woodyard for the morning's charcoal, because Will's little fire must be kept. That's part of his keeping, and the boy who weighs out your basket is Tom. Tom is 13, from Kent, with a burn scar on his wrist shaped like a fishhook, and a talent for knowing everything half a day before it happens. He's also, this morning, insufferable, because he has news, and you have to stand there while he makes you buy it with patience. Quarter-day money's come up from London, he says at last, tipping charcoal. Paid out this morning after Mass. And you'll want to look at it before you thank anybody. Look at it how? You'll see, says Tom, delighted, and charges you a smirk on top of the charcoal. You see at mid-morning, in the little wainscoted room off the great court where Master Fowler does the accounts for his corner of the household, Christopher Fowler, groom of the chamber, a narrow man with ink on the middle finger of his right hand like a permanent bruise, and a way of holding his ledger open against his chest when he walks, like a priest with a missal. Fowler is the man charged with the keeping of the king's fool. That's how it's written. The fool himself is kept, as you've learned, the way a swan is kept, and Fowler keeps him, receives the allowances, buys the wood and the candles, and pays you, the boy, your 40 shillings a year and your livery. 10 shillings a quarter. This quarter for Lady Day. He counts it out in coins you haven't seen before. New shillings. Testoons, they call them. 12 pence apiece. Big and handsome, with the king's face on them staring straight out at you, full face, beard and all. Not the old sideways king of your childhood pennies. New money, Fowler says, in the voice of a man repeating what he's been told to say. Take it and be glad of it. Will turns one of the big shillings over in the light from the window and then does something you don't understand yet. He rubs the king's face, hard, with his thumb and looks at the nose. Later, in the passage, he shows you. The coin is silver. It looks like silver. But the silver is a coat, a wash over copper, and it wears thinnest first at the highest point of the stamp, which is the king's nose. Rub a testoon for a month and the nose blushes red-brown while the cheeks stay white. The men in the London taverns, Will says quietly, because this is a thing you say quietly, have already found a name for His Majesty. Old Copper Nose. The wars in France ate the treasury, so since 1544 the mint has been baking coins like a dishonest cook bakes bread, less meat in them every year, and calling them by the old names. Then he pulls out his purse and shows you the other coin. He keeps it apart from his money, knotted into the corner of the leather. A groat, 4pence, minted 20 years ago. Small in the palm, worn smooth at the rim. Real sterling, the old standard, silver almost through and through. On it, in profile, a young king. Sharp-jawed. Lean. The same man who will eat his supper tonight in a chair built to be hauled by servants, but you'd never know it, and that, Will says, is the point of keeping it. His Majesty gave me this from his own hand my first Christmas at court. Look at it. That's the man I came to. This, and he clinks the new testoon against it once, is the man I stay with. He knots the groat away. Kings wear thin, John. Old silver keeps. Now go and beg my shirts off Nan before she gives them to a deserving beggar out of spite. The laundry is down by the river stairs on the service side. A long low room of steam and lye where the air is so wet it has weight, and your eyes sting before you're 3 steps in. Lye soap, boiled linen, wet stone, and under it the hot flat-iron smell of scorch that never quite goes away. Nan is a widow of maybe 45, forearms like a waterman's, 20 years in the king's laundries, and she has decided, for reasons she's never given, that you need feeding and correcting in roughly equal measure. She has Will's shirts ready in a bundle that smells of rosemary, because she dries his over the rosemary bushes in the little physics yard, which she does for nobody else in this palace below a lord. How are his knees on the stairs, she asks, not looking up from the sheet she's folding against her chest. Slow. Slower than Candlemas? You think about it honestly, because Nan can smell a courtesy the way she can smell mildew. Yes, the sheet gets folded, edge to edge, exact. 20 years I've washed for this house, she says. I've seen 3 fools carried in the wardrobe books, fed, dressed, kept warm as bishops, all of them, right up until the day they weren't. You look after his legs, boy. His mouth will do the rest. That mouth's the best offended thing in England. She hands you the bundle and puts one red hand flat on top of it for a moment, like a seal on a warrant. But nobody ever needed a fool who couldn't come when called. Go on. That evening you find out what all of it is for. The supper is in the king's privy chamber, which means small, which means worse. A public feast is a field. A privy supper is a duel. By 7 the room is candled and close, hangings drawn over the window glass, the fire banked high, because the king feels cold in his bad leg even when his face runs sweat. You come in behind Will carrying the stool and set it in its place at the hearth corner, and then you take your own place against the wall by the door where the servers stand, which is where you learn to be furniture. Feet still, eyes soft. Breathe through your mouth slowly, because the smell in this room is the thing the chronicles will never write down. Roasted swan and cinnamon and good wax candles, and riding through all of it, insistent, the wound. The king's left leg is bad, has been bad for years, an ulcer above the knee that closes and opens like a season, and this spring it is open. The physicians dress it with plasters from the apothecary, and under the fir and the civet and the rosewater there is a low note of something dying that every person in this room can smell, and no person in this room has ever smelled. You watch grown lords, brave men, soldiers, hold their faces perfectly pleasant inside that smell, and you understand more about this court than a year of watching heads fall would teach you. And then there's the king. You'd been told, of course. Everyone's told. It doesn't help. 54 years old this summer, and huge. Not fat the way a miller is fat, but massive the way a felled oak is massive. A great ruin of what the armoury across the yard still remembers, propped in a carved chair with his bandaged leg up on a velvet stool, rings sunk into his fingers, small eyes moving in a wide face like a weather sky. When he shifts, 4 men by the wall shift with him without knowing they've done it. His temper this year is a coastline in fog. Nobody knows where the rocks are until the noise. Supper goes long. Music from the corner, 2 lutes and a boy's voice. Wine. The lords talk carefully, the way men walk on river ice, and twice the king says nothing at all for a long time, staring into the fire, his hand working slowly at the arm of the chair against the pane, and the room quietly strangles. And then, into the second of those silences, Will Summers stands up off his stool, shakes the bladder once, that dry little bone rattle, and says, "Harry, Harry, not your majesty, not sire." There is one throat in England that word can come out of, attached to a head that stays on, and you are watching it work. When I came to court, you and I had one good leg between us, and it was mine. I've come up in the world since. Now neither of us has one, and I had to walk here. The silence goes taut as a lute string, one heartbeat too, while the king turns his head, and you learn later that this is the whole art, this pause, that Will has bet everything on the fact that the king's pain wants acknowledging more than it wants flattering, that every other soul in the room has spent the evening pretending the leg doesn't exist, and the fool has just sat down on the leg, so to speak, and made it furniture, made it ordinary, made it a thing 2 old men share instead of a thing one dying king carries alone. The king laughs. It starts low in the chest like a cart on a bridge, and the whole room exhales and laughs after him, and the music picks up, and then, this is the part you'll think about in bed. The king and his fool fall into rhyming at each other. It's an old game of theirs, older than you. The king throws a line, the fool must cap it, rhyme it, turn it. The king, who wrote songs once, who is still in there somewhere inside the ruin, gives him verses about wine and about winter, and Will caps each one quick as catch, and some of the caps are gentle and one is so sharp, something about frost taking the tallest trees first, that the room holds its breath again, and the king only nods slowly like a man paying a debt, and pushes the dish of comfits across for the fool to take his fill. An hour in, you see the thing you were brought to see, though nobody names it. Will's caps begin arriving a half-beat late. Only that. A half-beat, a hair of silence before the rhyme, where 5 years ago Nan says there was no gap a fly could land on. The king doesn't notice or chooses not to, but by the wall, in the shadow, Master Fowler is watching with his ledger face on, and he notices, and he sees you seeing him notice, and neither of you moves. Then Will does the cleverest thing you've watched a man do. Mid-game, riding a laugh, he pleads age before it can be entered against him. He mops his brow, staggers like a spent tumbler, drops onto the stool and calls up to the chair, "No more, Harry, have mercy. You're rhyming against a man who was old when your beard came in. Kill Frenchmen, not fools. We're rarer." And the king, delighted, being for one warm moment the young man who owns the sharp-jawed profile on a groat in this room nobody knows about, tells the musicians to play, and lets him rest. It isn't the jokes, you think, standing against your wall, feet aching in a cold you stopped feeling an hour ago. Anyone can be funny once. It's the reading. It's a man laying his finger on the pulse of a king in front of 40 people, and none of them seeing his hand move. It's near midnight when you get him up the stairs. He climbs in silence, spending everything he has left on the climbing, and at the top he stands a moment in the dark passage getting his wind, while somewhere below a spaniel clicks across the floorboards, coming up to sleep against a fool's feet like it always has. "Well," he says at last, still funny. "Yes, sir." "Mind you tell me," he says, "the day I'm not. You're the only one here who'd have no reason to lie about it. That's the most valuable thing you own, John. Don't sell it." By morning, that half-beat of silence before the rhymes is the only thing you can remember about the whole Golden Swan evening. That, and the way Fowler wet his quill. In April they send you to London, and the reason they send you is the knees. Will has a receipt. A plaster of his own devising got from an old horseleech years ago, that eases the ache better than anything the palace still-room makes, and the makings for it come from one shop only, and the shop is in Bucklersbury, and Bucklersbury is in the city, 5 miles of river away. Fowler writes you a paper with the household's mark so the watermen and the gatekeepers know you're not a runaway, counts 4 pence into your palm for the boat, as if each coin were a tooth he was giving up, and tells you to be back before the gates close or sleep in a doorway and be flogged, in a voice suggesting he has no preference. The tide decides everything on this river. Go up to London on the flood, come back on the ebb, and the water does the work with you. Fight it, and you'll pay a waterman double to break his back for hours. Tom, who has been to London twice and will govern the fact over you forever, walks you down to the palace stairs at first light, where the wherries knock against the piles like restless horses, and teaches you the single most useful sentence he owns, which is that you never take the first boat that calls to you, because the first boat that calls to you has priced you already. "Westward, ho!" calls the first boat. You wait. You look at the river. You're a boy in a king's livery coat, and you make them come to you, and the second waterman, older, forearms cabled, a face cured brown as a ham, offers to take you up to the Old Swan stairs for 4 pence, and you say 2, and he says 3, and you're aboard. The wherry's a narrow thing, 2 ends sharp, low in the water, and when you step in it tips just enough to remind you that the Thames in April is cold enough to stop a heart. You sit on the bench, grip the gunwale, let go of the gunwale because the waterman grins at you, and grip it again where he can't see. The river is the road. You knew that in your head. Now you watch it be true. Wherries everywhere, hundreds, crossing and passing like shuttles in a loom. Tilt boats with canvas hoods carrying gentlefolk out of the rain that isn't falling yet. Barges of hay and firewood riding low. A great shout of oars as a livery barge goes by. Some company of the city, gilded, drummed, arrogant, and your waterman spits over the side with the precision of long practice. Exactly once, exactly enough. He's been on this water 40 years, he tells you. Started as a boy pulling his father's stroke oar the year the old king died. The river feeds 30,000 of them, watermen and lightermen and their families, so they say. And every one of them is a philosopher because rowing is thinking time, and every one of them despises every other one professionally and would drown for any of them actually. And then the city grows up out of the river A's ahead of you, and it does what it does to everyone the first time. It stops your mouth, smoke first. A brown-grey lid of sea-coal smoke sitting over the whole basin of it, miles wide, the breath of maybe 70,000 people cooking and warming and working metal. Then the spires, dozens, and over them all the great one, Paul's, the cathedral riding the city's hill like a ship on a wave, its spire needling up so high near 500 feet men claim that the eye refuses it, has to climb it in stages, and then, spanning the water ahead, the thing you've heard about since you could hear, London Bridge. From the water it doesn't look like a bridge, it looks like a street that has made a terrible mistake. 19 arches on 19 great stone piers, and the whole top of it crusted with buildings, shops and houses 4 and 5 stories, leaning out over the water on both sides so that the roadway runs through them like a tunnel. 350 years that stonework has stood in the river, since the reign of King John, patched and burned and rebuilt on top but the same bones in the water, and men's grandfathers' grandfathers' grandfathers paid their farthings to cross it. The piers stand on platforms, starlings, like boats of rubble and timber, and they choke the river so badly that the tide, forcing through the narrow arches, drops the height of a man from one side to the other, and boils through like a mill race. Shooting the bridge, the watermen call running an arch at speed, and drowned men every year are the fee the bridge takes for the sport. Your waterman looks at the white water under the arches, looks at you and puts in at the old swan stairs above the bridge, because he says, wise men go around, and dead men went through. He also tells you, while you're still staring, about the heads. On the gatehouse at the southern end, on iron spikes boiled and tarred so the gulls take longer over them. Traitors' heads, there are always some. From here they're only specks against the sky, and you decide privately not to look harder, and then look harder anyway because you're 14, and then wish you hadn't, because you were right the first time. London itself, between the stairs and Bucklersbury, is an assault. You've been in the palace long enough to forget what unmanaged people sound like. The streets are a single continuous argument. Iron-shod wheels on stone, hammering from 3 smithies at once, the bawling of water-carriers with their tall cans, fishwives crying mackerel with a note that goes through your skull like a bradawl, kites and ravens quarrelling over the gutters, which need the attention, believe me. The smells change every 10 steps. Fish, then tanneries, then bread, then something so foul you don't ask, then suddenly turning into Bucklersbury, the whole street changes key. Grocers and apothecaries keep this lane, and it smells like the inside of a spice chest. Cinnamon and aloes and rosewater and wax layered over the everyday London base of smoke and dung like a carpet laid on mud. Master Thomas Alsop's shop is the one you want, and there's a small crowd of errand men waiting, because Alsop is the king's own apothecary, the man whose bills go to the royal household, and his boys run plasters and syrups downriver to whichever palace holds the king's leg that month. The shop inside is dim and fragrant. Walls of little drawers, bundles of dried herbs hanging like bats from the beams, a pair of scales fine enough to weigh a sigh, and Alsop himself quick-eyed, spare, in a good black gown with stains on the cuffs no laundress will ever defeat, reading Fowler's paper at arm's length. For summers, he says, and the name does what it does everywhere below the rank of baron, it warms the room half a degree. How are the knees on stairs? Slow, sir. Aye. He's already pulling drawers, weighing, folding papers of powder with fingers that move like a lutenist's. Comfrey, mustard seed, oil of chamomile. Warm it, don't cook it, tell the girl, and tell Will Summers from me that he has outlasted 3 of the physicians who bled him, and if he keeps to warm cloth and thin wine, he'll bury a 4th. He ties the parcel with twine, pauses 1 beat, and adds, in the voice men use at court for true things, tell him also to be seen merry. These months, of all months, a man in his place is safe exactly as long as he's seen merry. You carry the parcel back through the roar, ride the ebb home with a different waterman who sings, quite badly the whole way, and you're through the palace gate with daylight to spare, feeling like a voyager returned from the Indies, and nobody at all remarks on it except Tom, who demands the bridge described twice, both heads included. That night, while you warm the plaster cloth at the little fire and bind it to his left knee, exactly as instructed, wool above and below, not too tight. Will is quiet longer than usual. The chamber smells of mustard and chamomile and hot wool. The spaniel snores. Somewhere down the range a door is barred for the night, the sound travelling through the old brick like a knuckle rapped on the palace itself. And then he tells you, without being asked, the story you realise afterward he'd been deciding all evening whether to tell. You never heard of Patch, he says. You haven't. Sexton, his right name was. Patch was what the Cardinal called him. Wolsey's fool. You've heard of Wolsey at least, don't lie to me. You have. Everyone has. The butcher's son of Ipswich who rose to be Cardinal of York, Lord Chancellor, the second king in all but name, who built Hampton Court out of his own purse to show the first king what a purse could do. Well, when I came to court, Patch was the greatest fool in England, and I was nobody, and he was kind to me, in the way of a master craftsman being kind to a boy who hasn't cut himself yet. He'd been with Wolsey 20 years, slept warm, ate off silver, rode a mule in the Cardinal's own train, and loved that fat, dangerous man the way a dog loves the only fire it's ever lain by. Then the Cardinal fell, the divorce business, the year 29. You were nothing but a rumour in Shropshire then. And when a great man falls, John, he does not fall like a tree, he falls like a house. Everything inside him is spilled and picked over, and Wolsey, grasping for the one gift that might soften the king, sent him Patch, his fool, made him over like a cup or a horse, because that, at law, is what we are, movables. I was there when they brought him to the king at Grafton. It took 6 tall yeomen. I want you to understand what I'm telling you. It took 6 strong men to deliver one small elderly fool, because he fought them and he wept the whole way, for shame and for love of the man who was giving him away. The fire ticks. You have stopped moving, the wool bandage half tied. The king valued him the more for it. Said a fool worth 6 yeomen's trouble was a fool worth having. Patch served here after some years, but I'd watch him about the courts, and he was like a bell with the clapper gone. It wasn't the new service. He was fed, dressed, warm, kept. It was that he'd learned what he was. He'd thought, you see, all those years that he was loved. Then one bad autumn taught him he was inventory. Will leans back, works the knee gently against the fresh warmth of the plaster, and looks at the fire the way he never looks at the friary wall. The cardinal died the next year at Leicester, on the road to his trial, and Patch is dead 2 years since, and nobody wrote down where he lies, and he made 2 kings laugh till they wept. Finish the knot, lad. It's late. You finish the knot. But he isn't done, quite. As you bank the fire, he says to the ceiling, already half asleep, "They'll tell you a fool's tongue is free at court. It is. Freest tongue in England. It's the rest of him that's property. Mind you know the difference before you're old enough for it to matter." It's 2 nights later that he shows you the book. He comes back from the king's rooms past 10, moving carefully but lit up like a lantern. Some good evening behind him, wine and old songs, and he takes the candle from you at the door and says, "Come and see something," and leads you of all places along the gallery toward the closet where the keeper of the king's books lodges his charge when the court is at Greenwich. He's allowed. It astonishes you what he's allowed. The book he means is not large, bound in leather over boards, clasped, and inside, on vellum, in a fine French secretary hand, the Psalms, the king's own psalter, written and painted for him a few years back by his French limner, Mallard. Will turns the leaves with one knuckle, delicate as a girl, past kings praying and kings fighting giants, to the psalm of the fool, the one that begins, "The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God." And there, in the margin, painted, small and bright and forever, are 2 figures, a heavy old king in a furred gown, sitting hunched playing on a harp, and standing near him, in a green coat, hollow-cheeked, unmistakable. Not any fool, one particular fool. "That's you," you say, before you can stop yourself. "That's me," he says, "in the king's own prayer book. Where the devil should stand, there I stand." He looks at the little painted man looking back out of the psalm, and his voice does something you haven't heard it do, goes quiet and puzzled and young. "He had them paint me into his prayers, John. Whatever else comes, that's done. Ink out last favour. Remember it when you're frightened for me." He closes the clasp softly, like latching a door on a sleeping child. "And you will be." May brings the Queen's household back into your part of the palace, and with it Jane. Jane the Fool, the books call her, when they call her anything. The Queen's fool, as Will is the King's. You see her first in the barber's room off the long gallery, sitting very straight on a joint stool with a linen cloth about her shoulders, while Perrault the barber moves round her with his razor, shaving her head. You stop in the doorway because you've never seen anything like it. Perrault works in silence, careful as a man gilding a frame, lather and blade, and the pale scalp comes up in swathes out of the foam, and Jane sits with her hands folded, sucking a comfit, entirely serene. It's done every few weeks, you learn. It's in the accounts, the Queen's own accounts, money to the barber for shearing Jane's head, the way there's money for her gowns, and her gowns are good, better than many a gentlewoman's. russet and fine red wool cut down and made over from the Queen's own by the Queen's own tailor. The shaved head is part of the dress of her office, a fashion for fools of her sort, and under a fine cap it keeps her cool and clean, and it marks her, one glance, for what she is, the way Will's green and yellow marks him. Because Jane is the other kind of fool, and now you have to understand the trade's great division, the one Will explained to you with 2 fingers on the table like a man laying out armies. There are fools of craft, artificial fools he called them, wits who play at folly, jugglers of words, and he is one, the best living. And there are innocents, naturals, men and women born with something turned differently in them, who say what they see the moment they see it, without design, without fear, because design and fear never grew in them. Jane is an innocent. She might be 30, she might be 40, her face won't say. She speaks seldom, and then suddenly, and the things she says land slantwise on the world, in a way no craft can counterfeit. Great houses prize innocence above wits, some of them, because a wit might flatter you. But God, they say, speaks plain through the simple. The Queen loves her, keeps her close, dresses her like a daughter, and Jane follows Queen Catherine through the galleries carrying her little dog, and is, you will slowly realise, the only person in the royal apartments who is never afraid. Which matters. Because this summer, everyone else is. You feel it before you understand it, the way you feel weather. It comes in with the warm days, a tightening, fewer books left lying about, conversations in the galleries that end when footsteps come, Nan snapping at her girls over nothing and crossing herself in the old way, and then glancing to see who saw. And Tom, currency rich as ever, tells you the shape of it over dice you shouldn't be playing in the woodyard loft. The great men are fighting over God again, he says, and this year the Conservative Party has the King's ear, Bishop Gardiner and Lord Chancellor Wriothesley and their friends, and they are hunting heretics, which is to say, hunting the new religion, which is to say, hunting upward toward the Queen herself, who reads the new men's books and gathers her ladies for scripture like a little university, and has, Tom whispers, been heard to argue points of doctrine with the king himself, at his own bedside, which 5 years ago was charming, and this year, with the leg on fire and the temper gone to fog, is not. In May they arrest a gentlewoman preacher called Anne Askew, a name you will not forget, though you never once see her face. 25 years old, a knight's daughter out of Lincolnshire, thrown out by her husband for her Bible, come to London, examined once before and let go. This time they take her to the Tower, and in the last days of June the whisper comes down river that is so far outside the order of things that grown men repeat it in the voices of children. They have racked her. A gentlewoman, racked, which the law does not allow, and, the whisper says, the Lord Chancellor of England, Wriothesley himself, when the Tower's lieutenant refused to go on, put off his gown and turned the wheels with his own hands, he and Rich beside him, asking her one question over and over. Name the ladies. Name the ladies of the court who share your faith, who sent you money, who read what you read. The ladies around the Queen is what that means. She named nobody. They carried her out of that room in a chair because her own bones would no longer obey her. The palace hears it, and goes quiet the way a wood goes quiet when a hawk crosses it. And it is in these same weeks watching Will that you learn what an old fool is actually for. Not the jokes at supper. This, the king, in pain, is being fed suspicion by men who profit from his suspicion, and the whole court has become a room where no one dares say the obvious, and into that room, nightly, limps one man with licensed speech. You watch him work that terrible July the way you once watched a smith work, wanting to learn a trade you can see and can't grasp. He never argues religion, not once. A fool who argues doctrine is a heretic with bells on. Instead, he tells the king a story about a man who beat his best hound for barking at thieves, till the hound learned silence and the thieves learned the house. He mocks the churchman's fatness and the reformer's thinness in the same breath, even-handed, and under the mockery, if you listen with the king's ears, is one message over and over. They're all managing you, Harry, and manages him toward mercy, while seeming only to rattle a bladder on a stick. Half-beat late, his rhymes may come now. But you understand, watching the great sweating, dangerous face soften by degrees each evening, that this is a craft with no apprentices, that the 20 years were the price of admission to these particular 10 minutes, and that no quick-tongued boy brought up from an inn-yard could do what the slow old man does, because the material he works in is not wit, it is trust. The thing with the Queen breaks in July, and you are, by pure accident of a summer evening, 30 feet from it when it does. You know, because Tom knows that articles were drawn against her, that the bill of her arrest went to the king and the king signed it, that the plan of Gardiner's party was to take her to the Tower, her and her ladies, and let the rack's fruit do the rest. What you learn later, what all England learns later and tells forever after, is that the paper of the articles was dropped by God's providence or someone's very deliberate carelessness, where one of the Queen's people found it and carried it to her, and that Catherine Parr, who is nobody's fool of any kind, went that same night to the king's bedchamber and fought for her life with the only weapon in the room, submission. Perfect, absolute, wifely submission. She'd only ever argued religion, she told him, to take his mind from the pain of his leg, and to profit by his learning, for how could she, a poor woman, presume to instruct her lord and head, from whom all her little knowledge flowed? It went on, they say, in that vein, until the king, entirely satisfied, entirely soothed, said, "Is it even so, sweetheart? Then perfect friends we are again," and kissed her. Somebody forgot to tell the Lord Chancellor. The next afternoon the king has himself carried into the privy garden to take the air with the Queen, and you are there because Will is there, sitting on the grass verge with his knees at last unbent in the sun, making the Queen's ladies laugh softly at nothing, and you stand behind him holding his stick and his rattle, and it is for 1 hour the loveliest afternoon of the whole poisoned summer. Roses coming on, gravel raked, the river flashing beyond the wall, the king rumbling something and the Queen answering, and her little dog asleep in Jane's lap on the grass, and then boots on gravel, many of them, and through the garden gate comes Thomas Wriothesley, Lord Chancellor of England, with 40 of the guard at his back, come exactly on schedule to arrest the Queen of England, holding yesterday's warrant, in front of a king who changed his mind last night. What follows you will describe for the rest of your life, and never do it justice. The king heaves himself up in his chair. His face goes the colour of a November sunset, and he bellows at the second man of his kingdom, before the guard, the ladies, the gardeners, the fools, and God, words that London will be repeating in taverns within the week. Knave, arrant knave, beast, and, last and loudest, fool. Wriothesley kneels on the gravel, tries to speak. The king roars him flat a vaunt out of my sight, and the Lord Chancellor of England gets up and goes backward out of the garden gate, with his 40 men shuffling after him like a wedding walking in reverse, and the gate closes, and the roses continue, and nobody breathes. Into which silence, from the grass, in the mild, interested voice of a man settling a point of law, Will Summers says, "Harry, I'll have him before the courts. He's practising my office without a licence." The sound the king makes frightens the rooks off the garden wall. It is laughter with the whole ruined body behind it, laughter that doubles him over the arm of the chair, and the queen laughs with him, one note high and desperate with relief, and the ladies after her, and the terror of the summer breaks, right there, like a fever sweating out in a rose garden, on a joke about guild regulations. That night Will sits a long time on the edge of his bed, and he isn't laughing at all. "Say it," he tells you finally, because you're standing there with a plaster cloth, visibly not saying it. It was only a jest, you say, and it turned it turned everything. How can it be nothing and do that? Because it's not the jest, John, I've told you. Any fool can jest. It's the licence. He works the knee, staring at the little fire. He called Writhersley what I am, highest officer under the crown, and the worst word the king could find for him was my name. Think on what that means. To be a fool by office is nothing, less than nothing, a dog's place at the fire, and it is the one place in this kingdom from which a man could say, this afternoon, the true thing. Everyone in that garden knew the Chancellor was a villain with a warrant. One mouth in England was free to know it out loud. He hands you his cap, lies back and delivers, to the ceiling, in the tone other men keep for prayers, the sentence you will carry out of this year like the groat in his purse. They keep us because we're nothing, and because we're nothing, we can do what the great can't. There's the whole trade, boy, sewn in a nutshell. 2 days later, on the 16th of July, they burn Anne Askew at Smithfield anyway, with 3 men beside her before a great crowd, the bishops watching from a scaffold under Bartholomew's wall. She cannot stand because of the rack, so they burn her sitting, chained to the stake in a chair. Gunpowder about the necks, at least. Someone's mercy or someone's tidiness to make it quicker. You are at Greenwich, 5 miles of clean air away, and you burn nothing and see nothing, and know it all anyway by nightfall, the way the whole river knows it. Water carried, mouth to mouth, stripped of everything but the terrible simple picture. The palace takes the news without a sound. The Queen keeps her rooms. Whatever was won in the rose garden, it was not won for everyone. Jane does not understand executions, Nan says, and Nan is wrong. That evening Jane stands a long time at the gallery window that faces upriver, toward the city, where there is nothing to see but summer haze and sails, and she holds the Queen's little dog against her shaved head quite still. And as you pass with Will's supper, she says, not to you, not to anyone, in her sudden slantwise way. The chair burned too. Nobody asked the chair. You carry that up 3 flights of stairs and it never once gets lighter. The summer turns before the ashes at Smithfield are a week cold. It turns because of France. All your life France has been the enemy the way winter is the enemy, a standing fact of the world you were born into. The war is why the coins are sick. The war is why the king's new forts stand along the south coast and the press gangs emptied the river villages 2 summers back, and why men from your own parish went to Boulogne and some of them stopped writing. And on the 7th of June, at a tented field called Camp hard by Ardres, the old enemies finally signed their peace. You heard the bells carry it downriver in June, bonfires in London, Wine run at the conduits, Tom repeating the terms wrong with total confidence. Now in August, the peace itself is coming to dinner. The Admiral of France, Claude d'Annebaul, is crossing the narrow sea with 200 French gentlemen at his back to swear the treaty in the king's own chapel, and the king will feast him at Hampton Court, and so the whole court will move. And when I say the court will move, I need you to understand what moving means in 1546. This is not a household loading a wagon. The court is a walking town, 1,000 mouths and more. Cooks and clerks and chaplains and grooms and hawks and hounds and the men who keep the hounds, and the town takes itself apart like a siege engine. The tapestries come off the walls, brushed, rolled on poles, sewn into canvas. The beds are broken down to boards as cords. The plate goes into iron-bound chests with 3 locks whose 3 keys travel in 3 different pouches. Purveyors ride ahead, seizing bread and hay and firewood along the road at the king's price, which is not the seller's price, and the sellers know better than to say so. The king's things travel like relics. Everything else travels like baggage. Everything Will Summers owns goes into one small chest, and the chest goes onto a cart, and the stool goes onto your shoulder. You wrap it in a square of old canvas Nan gives you, and rope it like a lamb for market, and Will watches you knot it with his arms folded, offering no help and missing nothing. Mind the treaty, is all he says. Nan keeps his shirts back until the last morning, to give them one more day over the rosemary, and while they dry she finally sits you down on the bench between the coppers and takes your worst hose out of your hands and teaches you the thing you have been butchering since October. Linen thread, not wool, wool lumps. The needle goes under, not through. Small stitches, she says, like writing. A good darn should be read only by the man who made it. Under her eye you mend the left knee flat and smooth for the first time in your life, and she holds it up against the steamy light and looks at it longer than it deserves. Now you can keep the pair of you decent among strangers, she says. Frenchmen notice knees. And then, pressing the warm bundle of shirts into your arms, not looking at you, in the voice she keeps for things that are not jokes. Bring him back, boy. Palaces full of new faces are hard riding for old fools. New faces have to be taught to laugh at him. That's work, and work costs him now. Watch how much he spends. The household goes up by water, barge after barge, and yours goes through London Bridge, which you had privately sworn never to do. But there is a third way between shooting the archers and going around, and it is the way of barges and wise masters. You wait, slack water, the turn of the tide, the 1 hour when the river stops arguing with the bridge, and the water under the arches lies down flat and sullen like a hound told twice. The barge slides through in shadow, the starlings crowding close on either side, green weed and wet stone, the underside of the roadway rumbling overhead with carts, and for 10 heartbeats you are inside the bridge, in the cold smell of 350 years, and then out into sunlight and the upper river, and the whole crowded waterworld of London falls away behind you by the mile. Above Westminster, the Thames grows quiet and green. Swans, herons standing in the shallows like clerks, and then, around a long bend lined with willows, red brick out of green water meadows, chimneys like a brick forest, every chimney twisted differently, gilded weather vanes catching the afternoon sun, Hampton Court. Will stands in the barge, holding your shoulder, and looks at it a long time. You know who built this, he says. You do, because he has made sure of it. The Cardinal, Wolsey, the butcher's son of Ipswich, who raised the finest house in England out of his own purse. And then, when the sky began to lean on him, gave it to the king entire, house and hangings and plate, the biggest gift ever handed up in England, and it bought him 3 more years, and then the house was the king's and the cardinal was dead on the road to his trial anyway. Patch carried his master's cup through that gate 100 times, Will says. The barge slides toward the landing stage. The house is still here. Neither of them is. Brick keeps John, brick and old silver. He says it lightly. He says most true things lightly. It is the ones he says lightly twice that you have learned to store. Over the second gateway, blue and gold and glorious, is the great clock, new 6 years ago, made by the king's clockmaker Nicholas Orsion, and when you finally stand under it, you gawp like the country boy you're trying to stop being. It shows the hour, it shows the day, the month, the signs of heaven, the sun riding its course round the earth as is proper. And on one dial, small and businesslike among all that painted sky, it shows the time of high water at London Bridge. Because the court lives by the river, and the river lives by the tide, and even the king's own clock, gilded like a monstrance, must bow twice a day to the same grey water that decides when a laundry boy can cross to Bucklersbury. You stand there until your neck aches, a machine that knows the tide from 20 miles away. It's that new, that real. The French come in the 3rd week of August, and the court goes out to be looked at. You see Prince Edward for the first time on that road, and so does most of the court, because the child is kept at his own houses, away from crowds and their fevers, and his father's palaces know him mostly as a rumour of Latin and prayers. 8 years old, he rides out at the head of hundreds of gentlemen in velvet, sent to meet the admiral on the way, and bring him in with honour. A small straight figure on a horse too big for him, pale as candle wax, with the Seymour look about the chin, and he manages his horse and his little speech of welcome, they say, without one stumble in French. The gentlemen around him watch him the way sailors watch weather. The whole kingdom is that horse, you think, before you can stop the thought. And the rider is 8. Will, standing beside you in the crowd of household folk at the roadside, does not cheer with the rest. He watches the boy pass with his eyes narrowed against the dust, reading him, the way you have watched him read one enormous dangerous face for a year. This face is small and cool and gives back nothing, not even to hundreds of men shouting its name. He says. Nothing else. But you know by now that Will Summers says his most important things in single syllables, and you store that one too. What follows is 6 days of the most gold you will ever see in one place in your life. 2 banqueting houses have been raised in the gardens, timber and canvas conjured up in weeks and painted to shamestone, hung inside with tapestry and set with cupboards of plate stacked shelf above shelf to the roof, golden gilt, basins, ewers, pots, standing cups, not for use, most of it, but for looking. A wall of shine that says louder than any herald, we have made peace. But mind you remember what we could have paid for war. There is feasting in shifts, the young lords of England and France hunting all day and dicing half the night. There is a masque with torches. There is more sugar work than you knew existed in the world. Castles of it, a spun sugar St. George with a sugar dragon. And Tom, who is not there, will be told about it in a woodyard in Greenwich and will never fully forgive you. You hear a clerk of the counting house, grey with sums, tell another that the banqueting stuff alone, the timber and canvas and paint and hire, has cost above £1,000 before a single dish went to the fire. Your wage is 40 shillings a year, £2 You do the sum in your head the way Will taught you to do all court sums, quietly and behind your own face. 500 years of you standing in a garden built in 3 weeks to be pulled down in 1. Kept, not paid, you think, looking at the painted canvas pretending to be stone, even the buildings here. And in the middle of it all, every evening the 2 old kingdoms sit down together and the fool goes to work. You understand, that week watching from your place at the wall, what a strange precise instrument you are servant to. Because for 20 years, Will's stock in trade has been Frenchmen. The wars made the jokes. Frenchmen ran, Frenchmen starved, Frenchmen's boats leaked, the King of France dyed his beard. 20 years of that, retired in a single June, because now the Frenchmen are guests, and the same jest that won a winter supper would now cost a treaty. A whole warehouse of his trade gone at the stroke of 2 pens in a tent near Ardres. So you watch him restock in front of you, nightly, an old craftsman turning his shop around in 6 days. He mocks the piece itself gently, the way you can mock a new marriage to the groom's face. He tells the king, in the hearing of both courts, that he is ruined. Harry, ruined. Half my living was Frenchman. You might have thought of the fools before you signed. There is no relief in the treaty for us, and the king translates it himself, wheezing with pleasure. And the admiral laughs, and the French gentlemen laugh at their admiral laughing, and the English watch the French laugh at the English fool, and something in the room that was stiff goes soft, and the wine goes round again. Peace, you think, is also made of this. Not only seals and oaths. Somebody has to make the first joke both sides can afford to laugh at, and it had better be somebody who is nothing. Only twice all week does the king call for the rhyming game, and both times it is short, and both times the caps come a full beat late now, not a half, and both times the king picks up the pause and carries it himself, turning it into part of the sport, mock solemn, drumming his fingers on the chair arm while all wait upon the fool's slow wit, so that the lateness itself gets the laugh. It is kindly done. It is beautifully done. And it is done, you understand, with a small cold drop in your stomach, because the king has noticed. The king has been covering for him. The most dangerous man in Europe is quietly carrying his old fool, the way you carry the stool. Fowler is at the wall opposite, and Fowler has noticed the king noticing, and above his ledger face his eyes for once not doing sums, or not only. Nan's voice comes back to you through the torchlight. Work costs him now. Watch how much he spends. One evening, crossing the base court at dusk with Will's supper, you pass the Queen's ladies going into the masque, silk whispering on cobbles, and at the back of them goes Jane, in a fine new gown of russet made over from the Queen's own, her shaved head bare under the torchlight because she has taken her cap off to feel the warm air, and she's carrying the Queen's little dog and looking up at the torch flames with her whole face open, the way nobody else at this court looks at anything. No fear in it, no arithmetic. The torchbearers stare straight ahead. The ladies pretend she is not there. Jane sees the fire, and the fire, you would swear, sees Jane. Of the 2 fools you know, you think, one works harder than any man in England, and the other has never worked a day, and the court could lose either of them by one signature on one line, and only one of them knows it. The last great night, when the treaty is sworn, and the healths have gone round in both languages until the candles swim, the banqueting house empties toward 2 in the morning, servers stacking, torch smoke drifting, the plate wall being counted piece by piece back into its chests by men with lists. Will sits on his stool by the cooling hearth, the rattle across his knees, waiting for the room to be empty enough for him to be old in. Then he puts both hands on his thighs and pushes, and does not come up. He tries it again, casual, as if he'd only been shifting his weight. His arms shake. He sits back. He looks at the fire, and you cross the emptied floor as if you had been sent for wine, and you put your shoulder under his arm, and on three, quietly, between one server's trip and the next, you haul William Summers, the king's fool, onto his feet in the wreck of the greatest feast in England, and nobody sees it happen. That is the whole point of you. That has been the point of you since October. He gets his breath. He straightens as much as he straightens, and then, to the empty room, in a whisper, with the ghost of the supper hall flourish, he says, "The fool stood, Master Fowler. Enter it so." Getting him to bed takes a long time, and you count the stairs to yourself, and he counts them too. You can feel it through his hand on your shoulder, and neither of you says the number out loud. The French go home with the first cool mornings, loaded with gifts, horses, gold plate off that wall, and the court exhales and hunts its slow way back down the valley through September. And it is somewhere in there, in the smell of stubble fields and wood smoke, standing in yet another courtyard while the carts are loaded again, that you notice the year has begun to move under you like the tide turning, quietly, hugely, and nothing you or any man can hold will stop what it is carrying in. At Michaelmas, the 29th of September, Fowler counts out your quarter's 10 shillings in testoons again, and you have learned Will's trick now, and you rub one with your thumb before it is even cool from Fowler's hand. The nose comes up brown in a fortnight where the spring coins took a month. Worse metal again. The mint is baking them thinner every batch, and everyone knows it. And everything in every market costs more even where the harvest was decent, because it is not the bread that has changed, it is the shilling, and a 6 shilling makes every loaf in England lie about its price. You put the coins away and think of the old groat knotted in the corner of Will's purse, silver almost through and through, waiting like a fact. October makes it a year since you came up from Much Wenlock with one change of linen and a letter saying you could hold your tongue. Nobody marks it, why would they? But you mark it, lying on the truckle bed the night of the anniversary, listening to the breathing through the door, and you take stock of yourself like Fowler taking stock of candles. You can read a tide table now, and mend hose so the darn can be read only by its maker, and warm a mustard plaster to the exact heat that eases and does not scald. You can stand 4 hours against a wall without your feet screaming before the second hour. You know how a room smells when a king is dying in it, and how 40 people pretend it doesn't. And you know, because it is your trade to know, that the breathing through the door is shorter this October than last, and that the stairs have gone from a quarter hour to 20 minutes, and that you have started without ever deciding to, adding your own strength into his day in small secret ways, an arm here, a lie there, the stool set 6 inches nearer the door than it used to be. Nobody sees it. That is the point of you. The court does not go back to Greenwich. The king's autumn hunting is cut short, a few weeks at his smaller houses, Chobham, Guildford, the game brought almost to the standing so that he can shoot without walking, and then, as the leaves come down, the barges turn toward Westminster, and by November the court is settled at Whitehall, the great sprawling palace the king took from Wolsey, because everything, you understand now, everything in this reign was taken from Wolsey. And somewhere under all of it is a dead cardinal holding up the floor. Whitehall in November is a world of corridors. 2,000 rooms, men say, galleries running like streets, and the fog comes off the river and gets into the passages and stands in them, so that walking with a rushlight after dark you move through cloud indoors. The king's rooms are kept hot as August. The doctors come and go in relays now, and the apothecary bills, Fowler mutters, would keep a parish. The leg has closed again, and you have learned enough this year to know that this is not good news, that when the wound closes the fever rises, and the fits of it come closer together, each one leaving the great body a little more sunken in its chair. Through October and November there are days, then strings of days when no one sees him at all. The privy chamber closes like a fist. Music still sounds from behind the doors some evenings not. And the fool sits in his little room 2 floors down like a tool on a shelf and waits to be wanted. That is the other thing nobody tells you about this trade, and you learn it that grey autumn. The work is not the hard part. The waiting is the hard part. A carpenter without work can walk to the next town. A kept man waits. Will is called perhaps twice a week now, sometimes to sit an hour by the fire and say almost nothing, because what the king wants some evenings is not jests but company that predates his troubles. A face from 1525, from before the divorces and the burnings and the leg, and Will can sit with him inside that fact the way old dogs sit together. Then 5 days, nothing. He mends. He sleeps badly and calls it thinking. He teaches you riddles and the small hand of reading faces, whose eye moves first when a lie starts, how a man stands when his purse is empty, and he watches the door. Am I still funny, John? He asks it on a fog-blind December evening, not on a stair this time, straight across the little fire with the rattle lying on his knees. And you remember the passage at Greenwich in the spring, mind you tell me the day I'm not. You're the only one here who'd have no reason to lie, and you understand that the day has come to pay that debt, and that this too was always part of your wages. Not Tuesday, you say. Your heart is going like a linnet, but your voice comes out level, which is his own training coming back at him. Tuesday you were tired, and the piece about the physicians went too long, and my Lord Liesel laughed before the end because he saw the end coming. The rest? Yes. Sunday you were the best I ever saw you. The fire ticks. The spaniel groans in its sleep. Will Summers looks at you for a long moment, and something in his face you have no word for. Relief and grief in the one look, like a man hearing true weather at sea. Sunday I was, he agrees. Tuesday I borrowed against Sunday. He takes up the rattle, shakes it once by his ear out of pure habit, listening to the 3 Ps. Good lad. Then we retire the physician's piece, and Tuesday nights we go shorter. An old fool's art John is knowing what to stop doing. He points the bladder at you like a bishop blessing. You just did the most dangerous work in this palace, and did it clean. Telling a man the truth about himself is the whole of my trade and the end of most men's. Remember how it felt. It should always feel like that. The day it feels easy, hold your tongue. You bank the fire and go out to your cold bed, strangely warm, and it lasts until the 12th of December, when the world tips. Perra the barber brings it, because barbers hear everything first, faces being where news lives. He comes to shave Will by the window light. Strop, lather. The little room full of the clean tallow smell of the soap, and his hands are steady because a barber's hands are always steady, but his voice is pitched for the 2 of you alone though the door is shut. They've taken my Lord of Surrey, he says, and his father, the Duke. The razor whispers along the jaw. Will's eyes are closed. Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, the old Duke of Norfolk's heir, first poet of England, first peacock of England, who fought at Boulogne and quarters his arms like a prince, marched on foot through the city to the tower 2 days past, Perrault says, through the open streets in the sight of the citizens, which was done on purpose, because that is how you spend a proud man's pride. And his father the Duke taken by water the same day, the oldest neck in England, the man who survived every fall of every faction for 40 years. The charge will be treason. The charge is always treason. Something about the arms he bears, quartering the old king's arms, which is claimed to be a reaching at the crown. The whole Howard interest, Perrault says, wiping the blade. Down in a day. They say the young earl talked and talked and talked, and his sister has given evidence, and his own father may go to the block behind him. He shakes out the cloth. Christmas will be quiet. When he is gone, Will sits by the window a long time with his shaven face in the winter light, and he looks old in a way the firelight never shows you. The skin gone thin over the bones like the silver over the copper. Now mark it, he says at last. You watched a chancellor grovel in a garden in July and keep his place. You'll watch a duke's son die for a coat of arms by Candlemas. There is no flaw in this house, John. There never was. There's only the king's hand under some of us, for as long as it pleases him to hold it there. He turns the rattle over, not shaking it, just turning it, an old man turning his whole estate in his fingers. And his hand is closing. A dying lion still strikes. It only strikes nearer. The wise course now is to be small and warm and known to be harmless. A breath of a laugh through his nose. Fortunately, I have spent 20 years becoming the most harmless man in England. We are about to find out what that buys. The Queen and her household keep Christmas at Greenwich. The King keeps it at Whitehall, apart, behind the closed fist of the Privy Chamber, and this has not happened in living memory. A King of England and his Queen at separate hearths for Christmas, and the whole court understands and no one says. So there is no Jane down the gallery this Christmas, no Nan, no Tom, no rosemary shirts. There is fog on the river and halls half lit. The revels are thin, the Lord of Misrule's men going through there tumbling for half-empty benches, and 3 times in the 12 days Will is sent for after supper, and 3 times you carry the stool along the freezing galleries and set it by the fire in the small hot room that smells of civet and wax and the wound, and stand at the wall and watch an old fool and an old king sit together with the music low. There are no rhymes now. The kings talk wanders, they say, up river and down river in time, Boulogne 1 minute and his father's court the next. On the last of those 3 nights, standing at your wall, you hear him say, out of a long silence, in that voice like a cart on a bridge, Will, you were at Greenwich when I married Catherine, and you feel every server in the room stop breathing, because there have been 6 Catherines and Annes and Janes, and 3 of them are dead, and 2 of them ended worse, and no one opens that cupboard. Which Catherine no man dares ask, and any answer at all is a field of knives. And the fool says gently, without a half-beat of pause, the truest safe thing in England. I was there, Harry. It was a fine day. You wore the French sleeves, and not a man in the yard could look away from you. Silence. The fire spits, and the king nods slowly in the firelight, satisfied, because every word of it was true of every one of those weddings, and the room breathes again, and the music comes back up, and you stand against your wall with your knees loose with relief, understanding at last completely why the boy who could hold his tongue was hired, and what the man who cannot hold his tongue must never hold it, is actually paid in, who is paid in nothing. He is paid in moments like this. in being the one voice in the kingdom that can walk on that water and not go under. You get him up the stairs. 22 minutes now. At the top he says, "To the dark, not to you. Sleep, Harry." And then he goes in, and the latch clicks, and the spaniel pads past your legs into the warm, and you lie down across the doorway of the man you serve, who serves the man the whole world serves, and the year 1546 burns down like the rushlight. 6 days left. 5, 4, January comes in iron. The new year is 1547 by the way you and I count, and the fog gives way to a still, ringing cold, gulls walking on the frozen margins of the river, the water stairs glazed and murderous, the conduits bearded with ice. In the second week they try the Earl of Surrey at the Guildhall, a common jury of London citizens for the proudest blood in England, and he defends himself all day, brilliant, scornful, doomed, and the verdict is the verdict everyone knew before the barge left the Tower. On the 19th of January they take him up Tower Hill in the morning cold and cut off his head. He is 29 or 30 years old. The finest maker of verses in the kingdom, men say, though you have never read one, and now never will hear him make another. You're in the city that day, and this is how you come to see the edge of it, and only the edge, which is the only way you ever want to see such a thing again. Will's knees in the deep cold have gone from bad to worse than bad, and the palace stillroom's plasters do nothing. And so Fowler, grumbling about the boat fare in 2 currencies, writes you a paper and sends you to Bucklersbury again, to Allsop. The shop is warm and dim and smells of cloves and wax like a chest of summer kept against the siege of the year. Allsop reads the paper, looks at you over it, and asks the question he asked in April. How are the knees on stairs? And you tell him the truth. 22 minutes, and his quick lutenist hands go still on the counter for a moment, which from him is a speech. Double the mustard seed, then, and a water of guaiacum for the mornings, he says, weighing, folding, tying. And keep him off his feet in this cold where you can. Then, in the voice men use for true things, the voice you first heard in this shop 9 months ago. It's a bad month to be near the great boy. The bills that come to me from Whitehall these weeks, I read them the way a pilot reads water. Physic for a man they think will live is one kind of list. What they've been sending me for is the other kind. Tell nobody I said so, and tell Summers what I said in April. Seen merry, now more than ever. Men are drawing up lists of what comes next, and a fool who is seen merry is on nobody's list. You come out of Bucklersbury with the parcel warm under your coat, and the streets are wrong. Emptied, tilted, the whole current of the city setting one way, east toward the Tower, the way water sets toward a sluice, and you are 14, and you have a free hour and a heart that is 14, and you follow it. You get no nearer than the top of a lane off Tower Street, a furlong from the hill, packed shoulder to shoulder behind 10,000 backs, and you see nothing at all but the backs and the heads, and the frozen breath of a whole city going up like smoke, and one corner of the black-draped scaffold rail far off between chimneys. You hear it, though. You hear the crowd sound die away to a stillness so complete you can hear a dog bark across the river in Suffolk. A stillness of 10,000 people listening to one young man's voice, too far off for words, only the pitch of it, steady, and then not there. And then a sound from 10,000 throats at once that is not a shout and not a groan, but something underneath both. The sound a crowd makes in the half-second it becomes 10,000 separate people again, each one suddenly alone in his own neck, his own morning, his own luck. You do not see the axe. You will always be glad you did not see the axe, and you will always know exactly what the sound of it reaching the crowd sounded like, which is a different kind of never forgetting. You walk back to the boat through streets coming noisily alive again, sellers crying hot codlings and saffron cakes to the dispersing crowd, because London digests everything, and you sit in the stern wrapped to the eyes while the waterman pulls down the ebb through the shattering cold, past the bridge, past the frozen marshes, and you think about a man who had lands and titles and genius and 30 years, and about a man who has nothing at all, not even a wage, and which of them is alive tonight? They keep us because we're nothing, the voice in your head says, in Will's voice, sewn in a nutshell. On Tower Hill this morning they spent everything the other kind of man had. Nothing, it turns out, is the strongest armour in England. Will hears your account of it, all of it, the lists, the guaiacum, the sound, with his eyes closed, and says only, "The father's still in the tower, attainted both of them. The Duke's turn will come within the week, they'll want it done while the doing's good." And then, so quietly that you barely catch it, "Quickly now, Harry, or be shamed. Even your headsman is working ahead of you. You don't understand that until later. Later you will understand it perfectly. On the evening of the 27th of January, a Thursday, the summons comes after all. Past 8, a groom of the chamber at the door saying the King's Grace would have music and company, and you help Will into the green and yellow coat, and he takes up the bladder stick from the chest, and out of habit older than you are, he shakes it once beside his ear. It rattles wrong. 2 peas, not 3. Somewhere in the dry, cloudy globe of it, 1 pea has split with age and cold, and what was a rattle like small bones is now a lighter, thinner sound, a sound with a hole in it. You know what he has told you since your first week. A fool's rattle going quiet in front of the king is an omen, and omens are the one thing he refuses to supply this court. And the spare peas are where they have always been, knotted in a rag at the bottom of the chest, and the king is waiting, and you are both of you, for 1 long second, standing in the little room listening to the wrongness, and the cold that walks up your back has nothing to do with January. Will opens the bladder's binding with his thumbnail, quick and steady as Pero stropping, shakes the split halves out into his palm, picks the soundest pea from the rag by rushlight, drops it in, binds the stick, shakes it. Once, rattle. 3 voices again, dry and true. "No omens tonight," he says. "Tonight of all nights, John. This house gets nothing from me but whether it likes." And he puts the split pea both halves into your hand and closes your fingers on it with both of his, and for one moment the jester's face is all the way open, the way Jane's face is open at torches. Keep that. When you're old and somebody asks you what a fool's life was made of, show them. 3 dried peas and good timing. Now take up the stool. The room 2 floors up is very hot and very quiet. The musicians play low. The great bed's hangings are drawn half back, and the king is propped hugely among pillows grey as ash, breathing like the tide through the bridge, and he does not speak much, and what he speaks is thick, but his eyes find the green and yellow coat when it comes in, and follow it. And when Will sits on the stool set close by the bed and begins, not jests, just talk, low, easy, the old talk of 40 years, hawks they had flown and horses long dead, and the sound the crowd made at some tournament 30 summers gone when a young king in silver armour carried off the prize of the day, the eyes settle, and the terrible labouring of the chest eases by some degree that you can see from the wall, and one of the physicians looks at his fellow, and neither of them stops what is happening on that stool, because it is doing more than the guaiacum. You stand at the wall past midnight. You will stand at that wall in your mind for the rest of your life. The candles, the civet, the wound, the low lute, and an old fool sitting up close against the bed of the man who owned him, talking him gently down the evening the way you'd walk a spent horse cool, and once, near the end, you see the great ruined hand move on the coverlet, 2 fingers, a summons an inch high, and Will puts the bladder stick under that hand, the worn painted stick, the trade of nothing itself, and the fingers close on it and are still. They send everyone out not long after. In the passage, Will stands a moment getting his wind, and does not say still funny, and you do not say yes, sir. You get him down to his chamber, 25 minutes. Neither of you counts aloud. 2 mornings later, before light, on the 28th of January, the palace changes sound. You have lived in palaces 1.25 years now, and you know their noises the way a waterman knows water, and you wake on the truckle bed in the dark, knowing something before you know it. The bells have not rung differently. No one has cried anything in the courts. It is quieter than it should be, that is all. Fewer feet walking faster. Doors closed with too much care. A palace whispering with its whole body. The official world proceeds as if nothing whatever has happened. This is the part you will tell for 50 years and watch men not believe you. For 3 days, meals go up to the king's apartments with full ceremony, trumpets sounding in the courtyard, covered dishes borne high past bowing servers to a closed door, and come away again. The council sits. Orders go out under the stamp of the king's hand, because there is a stamp of the king's hand, and it works whether or not a hand is left to warm it. For 3 days England has a king the way the bladder had 3 peas, by the sound of it only, and only those very close can hear that the rattle is wrong. Will does not go out those 3 days. He knows, of course. He knew before you, before the trumpets told their first lie over an empty dinner. He sits by the small fire with the spaniel against his shin, and he is not merry and not weeping. He is doing something you have no name for, an accounting. 21 years, from the wool merchant's cart to the closed door upstairs. On the 2nd evening he takes out his purse, unknots the corner, and holds the old groat in the firelight, the sharp-jawed, lean young king in silver almost through and through, and he looks at it for a long time, and then he says to the fire in the voice of a man closing a ledger, "There he is. That's where they'll none of them ever reach him now. Kings wear thin, John." The fire ticks. Old Silver keeps. On the morning of the 31st of January, the Lord Chancellor Wriothesley, the same Wriothesley of the garden, of the rack, weeps actual tears before the Parliament of England as he tells them their king is dead, and whatever else you think of that man all your life. Those tears confuse you, and Will says the truest thing anyone says that whole grieving, manoeuvring winter. He wept for the both of us, John. Whatever the king's death profits a man, 30 years of knowing where you stand died with him. Tomorrow every man in England wakes up unsure of his footing. I'm the only one who's used to it. The bells begin at every church in London within the hour, all of them, the whole ring, tolling by turns until the sky over the city is one bronze weight, and they will toll for days. In the courts of Whitehall men go carefully, in black where they have black, faces arranged, eyes everywhere, because the new king is 9 years old, and a council of 16 men holds the kingdom, and the Earl of Hertford, the boy's uncle, is riding to secure the boy's person, and everyone with anything, an office, a place, a pension, a bed, is asking the same question behind their arranged faces. Am I kept on? And no one in that whole palace of 2,000 rooms is asking it from a lower place, or with an older neck, than the man you serve, who is nothing, who was the dead king's shadow, whose entire estate in this world is a stool, a coat, a bladder stick, and 21 years of one man's laughter. And the man is in lead now, and the laughter is nowhere at all. The old Duke of Norfolk, by the way, does not die. The king's death outruns his warrant by hours, and the council does not care to open a new reign with the oldest head in England. And so he simply stays in the tower, alive, attainted, forgotten, for years. Quickly now, Harry, or be shamed. You remember and understand, and are careful to be alone when you shiver. The answer to the question comes on a Tuesday in early February, and it comes the way everything true comes in this world. Not with trumpets, but with ink. Fowler sends for you both. His little room at Whitehall is like his little room at Greenwich, wainscot and cold and candle smell, and on the board before him lie 2 books. The old household book, The Dead Kings, closed, and a new book, open, fresh ruled, the leaves still smelling of the binder, into which the officers of the new reign are carrying over, line by line, name by name, the establishment of the young king's house. This is how kingdoms actually change hands, you will tell people later. Not on battlefields. In rooms like this, a narrow man with an inked middle finger, copying some names and not copying others. Fowler does not make a speech. Fowler has never made a speech in his life. He turns the new book around on the board so that it faces Will, and he sets his finger under a line, and you crane, shameless, past Will's shoulder and read it with your own eyes. William Summers, the King's Fool. Wages, none. Meat, drink, wood, candle, livery, as heretofore. Kept. The room is very quiet. Will looks at the line a long time. Outside, a cart. The bells still far off, some church still paying out its toll for the old king. There were those on the council, Fowler says at last to the ledger, because that is who Fowler talks to, who held that a child king has tutors enough and needs no fool, and that the item might be struck for economy, the times being what they are. He pauses. He wets his quill, twice, slowly, the old terrible gesture, and then he lays it down without striking anything at all, which from Christopher Fowler is a whole cathedral of a gesture. It was answered that his majesty that's gone kept you 80 quarters, and more without once questioning the charge, and that the young king's grace is a child in a house of ink and Latin, and a child should hear laughing somewhere in it. The item stands. You are the young king's man now, as you were his father's. He closes the book with both hands, gently, the way Will closed the clasps of the Psalter. 80 quarters, he adds, in a different voice, an actual human voice, and this is the only time in your life you hear Fowler say a thing not required by his office. I have kept the fool's accounts 11 years, Summers. It has been the one line I never once had to justify to an auditor. Whatever else you are the best bargain in either book. Go and be seen merry. It is now an act of policy. In the passage outside, Will stops and leans against the wainscot and breathes for a while, and you pretend one more time to be studying the ceiling. Patch was given away, you think, watching him sideways. 6 yeomen and weeping. Will has been left, like the hangings, like the clock at Hampton Court, like the stool, inherited by a child along with 3 kingdoms and a debased coinage, passed down the way furniture is passed down. And standing in that cold passage, you understand at last fully the whole answer to the question you have been living inside for a year. What happens to a fool when he grows old is exactly this, and nothing else. There is no pension. There is no guild. There is a line in a book, and there is whether or not, when the ink is weighed, enough men in the room can remember laughing. He is kept, or he is not. It is that narrow, that real. All of it, 21 years of genius on a 3-legged stool, comes down at the end to one narrow man's finger under one line, and the line held. Well, Will says at last, pushing off the wall, gathering himself, and the voice is steady again, the shop-front voice, the trade voice. You heard the man, merry by order of the council. There are worse warrants out this month, John. Fetch the coat. On the 14th of February, the old king goes home to Windsor. You see the procession leave from Charing Cross in the iron dawn, packed among the household servants, black cloth as far as sight runs in both directions. 4 miles of it, men say, the longest funeral train England has made in memory. Banners hanging dead in the cold air, hundreds of horses trapped in black velvet, the bishops, the heralds, the lords, and in the middle of it, drawn by 8 great horses, the chariot with the coffin, and upon the coffin, and this is the thing you will never be able to make anyone see who did not see it, lies the king. An image of him, wax and wood, dressed in crimson velvet, furred with minever, the crown upon its head, rings on its fingers. So like the living man, men whisper, that the eye refuses the truth of it. And along the whole line of the route as it passes, the people kneel down in the frozen mud, and not quite knowing which of the 2 things on that chariot they kneel to. It will lie that night at Sion, and the next at Windsor, and there they will lower it through the choir pavement to lie beside Queen Jane, the 3rd one, the one who died giving him the boy, which is, you think, its own kind of last word. Beside you in the crowd, Will watches the chariot come level. He does not kneel, because he cannot, not on this ground, not with these knees, and a fool is licensed even here, even now. Instead, as the wax face passes, high and serene above the black horses, you see his right hand go into his purse, to the corner of it, and close around something small and hold it, hard. The whole time the chariot is passing, an old man holding 4 pence of honest silver in his fist like a relic while all the empire's black velvet rolls by. Kings wear thin. Old silver keeps. He does not say it. He has already said it. You stand beside him bareheaded in the cold until the last horse is past, and the crowd unkneels itself, sighing. And somewhere behind you a seller, unable to help herself, softly begins to cry hot pies. And 5 days after that, the world turns itself inside out like a sleeve, black to gold, in a single morning. On the 19th of February, the young king rides from the Tower through London to Westminster, to be crowned on the morrow, and London, which wept itself dry the week before, throws itself a spring in the middle of winter. The conduits run wine, the streets are gravelled fresh. Tapestry and arras hang from every window along Cheapside so that the whole street is a gallery, and the guilds line the way in their liveries, and there are pageants at every corner, children dressed as angels singing verses at a 9-year-old who passes beneath them small and upright on his horse, in white velvet and cloth of silver sewn with pearls, a small straight figure you first saw on a dusty road in August, now the 6th of that name, Edward, King of England, and the shout that goes down Cheapside ahead of him is like a wave running down a beach. You are there, in the standing room of the household, with Will beside you on a stool, on his stool, the treaty itself, carried by you through the crowd on your shoulder, and set down on the cobbles of Cheapside, because if any man in London may sit in the King's presence, it is this one, and no one, not one officer, in that whole delirious street, questions it. And at Paul's churchyard the thing happens that you will tell in Shropshire 40 years from now to grandchildren who will not believe you, and it will be true anyway. A rope has been stretched from the battlements of Paul's steeple, from up where the birds hunt each other, 500 feet of sky, down anchored to the ground by the Dean's Gate. And a man, a sailor from Aragon they say, lies on that rope at the very top and comes down it, head first, arms spread wide like a diving bird, no hand on the rope, down the whole swooping length of it as fast as a stone falls, so fast the whole crowd's breath goes out of it in one gasp, and he lands and lives and capers, and kisses the young king's horse's hoof. The boy king stops the whole procession to watch and makes him do more and laughs. You are close enough to see it. The small, cool face that gave back nothing on the August road, open and helpless with laughing, a child after all for 1 minute in the middle of his own coronation. Will watches the boy laugh the way Alsop reads bills. Then he nods, once, slowly, a craftsman pricing a job, and says mostly to himself, "There he is. There's the door in. Not verses, not the rhyming. That was his father's game, that dies with the old shop. Tumbling, dogs and wonders. Simpler tools, John." He works himself up off the stool, one hand on your shoulder before you've offered it, and for the first time in weeks there is real light in the quick brown eyes. An old fool's art is knowing what to stop doing. It is also knowing what to start. Come, we have a new master to study, and he has just shown us his whole hand in 1 minute, God love him, which his father never did in 20 years. The morrow is the crowning itself, Westminster. Anthem and oil and acclamation behind abbey walls. Shortened, men say, in tenderness to the king's young age. And that evening there is feasting in the great hall and revels, and in the midst of the revels, on the far margin of all that gold, a 9-year-old in a crown too heavy for him is brought his father's fool. You're at the wall. You're always at the wall. You watch Will Summers go forward into the candlelight, older than the boy's grandfather would be, in the green and yellow coat, and, God be thanked, the knees hold, and he makes his reverence, and then he does the thing you would never have guessed, the simple, perfect thing. He shakes the bladder stick once, that dry little rattle of 3 peas, and he looks at the crown, and he looks under the table, and he looks behind the boy's chair, elaborately, an old man hunting for something lost, and he says, loud enough for the boy alone, "Your pardon, sire. I'm sent to find the King of England, and they've given me no description, save that he's the wisest head in the room. I'll be all night at this. Would you know him?" And the boy, solemn, buried in ermine, 9 years old and crowned this morning over 3 kingdoms, looks up at the old fool and points one finger at himself silently, and Will falls back a step, staggered, clutches the rattle to his heart like a man before an apparition, and bows so low his cap sweeps the floor. And Edward the Sixth of that name laughs, not policy, not manners, the helpless minute-long laugh of the rope-flyers' crowd, both hands over his mouth, shoulders shaking under all that ermine, laughing at the first thing in this immense, terrifying week that has knelt to him and meant it. At the wall, unprofessionally your eyes sting. The line in the book holds, the office lives. Somewhere under the floor of the year Patch's ghost can rest. It can be done, after all. It can just be done. An old fool can outlive his king, if the fool is wise enough and humble enough, and reads the room to the very last, and is lucky, and is lucky, and is lucky. In March, the household of the queen that was, Catherine, now Queen Dowager, removes from court to her manor at Chelsea, up the river, and with it goes Jane. You're on the water stairs at Whitehall the morning her barges load, sent down with a parcel, and Jane is standing at the stairhead in her good russet gown and a new cap, holding the little dog, waiting to be told which boat, because Jane does not manage boats. Boats are managed around her. The Queen Dowager keeps her, of course. Of course she keeps her. That house never had a doubt in it, whatever else it had. You make Jane your best beau, because you are a year and a half at court now and you have manners, and because you will miss her in a way you cannot explain to Tom or even quite to yourself, this woman who was never once afraid. Jane looks at you with her wide-open face, and then past you up the stairs to where Will is standing at the top in the raw river wind, come down to see the Queen's people off, his coat wrapped close. And she says, in her sudden way, in that voice that lands slantwise across the world like light through bad glass, "The old man kept the little man in his book. You wait. With Jane you learn to wait." The dog stirs in her arms, and she settles it, and finishes, to no one, to the river. Both books now. He's in both books. He can't fall out of two. Then she goes down into the barge entirely serene, and the watermen push off into the tide, and you stand on the cold stairs working it through, the way you always end up working through what Jane says, and it opens slowly in your hand like everything she ever said. The King's Psalter, the little green figure standing in the margin of the psalm, and now Fowler's new ledger, the line carried over, the item that stands, painted into one dead man's prayers, written into one child's accounts, in both books now. Ink outlasts favour, and he is in twice. You climb the stairs and tell Will what she said, because you tell him everything now. That is what you are for. And he stands a while looking up the river after the Queen Dowager's barges, small on the bright water, and the wind moves the thin grey hair at his temples, and at last he says, "Natural see the truth walking about in its shirt, John, before the rest of us have got it dressed. Yes, both books." He turns for the door, his hand finding your shoulder, the weight of it familiar now as your own coat. "Come on. The tide's making, and we go down to Greenwich with it in the morning. The young king favours the place." A dozen slow steps, and then, so quietly it might be to the river. Born there, wasn't he? They always favour the place they were young. Greenwich in April takes you back like a coat you'd forgotten was yours. The tide smell through the shutters, the chapel bell thin and businesslike, the dead friary wall with its pigeons, the truckle bed across the doorway that your body has missed the exact shape of. The spaniel, who travelled the winter in the king's own baggage like the treasure it thinks it is, finds Will's hearth again by nightfall the first day, and is asleep against his shin before the fire is fairly lit, and something in your chest goes quietly back into joint at the sight of it. Nan comes up from the laundry the first morning, ostensibly with shirts, actually to look at Will with her own eyes, and she stands in the doorway of the little chamber a long moment, taking stock of what the winter left, the thinner face, the slower rise from the stool, the coat, and Will bears the inspection the way he bears the king's, because in this palace these are the two audits that matter. Then she nods, once, the sheet-folding nod, exact. 20 years I've washed for this house, she says to you, though it is aimed past you. 3 fools I've seen carried in the wardrobe books, and all 3 went out of them before they went grey. The red hands smooth the bundle flat. 4 now, and this one has walked himself into a new book on his own 2 bad knees. She sets the shirts on the chest, and the smell of rosemary comes off them like the whole green side of the year arriving, and at the door she pauses and delivers, in the voice she keeps for things that are not jokes, "I'll dry for you as long as there's a bush in that yard, Will Summers. See you give my boy here time to grow before you wear him out." And she's gone down the stairs before either of you can price what she said. Tom is still in the woodyard, senior now, 13 months of self-importance taller, and he makes you pay for the winter's news the way he has always made you pay, in patience, before he will even weigh your charcoal. But the debt runs the other way this time, and you both know it, and you sit on the bollard by the woodyard gate in the April sun and give him all of it. The wax king on the chariot, the wine in the conduits, the man who flew down from Paul's steeple head first with his arms spread like a bird. Twice, both tellings, sound effects included, and Tom's eyes over the smirk are the eyes of a boy storing treasure. There is a new boy in the woodyard now, 10 years old, up from Deptford, so green he stacks billets bark down, and Tom governs him mercilessly, the fishhook scar flashing as he points out failings, and the boy's chin wobbles over the 7th correction of the morning, and you catch him behind the woodstack afterward, the way nobody caught you. It gets easier, you tell him, and hear whose voice yours has become, and stand there a moment inside that, feeling the year turn under you again, gently this time. In May, on a still bright morning when the young court is away hunting, and his knees have declared a truce, Will says, "Fetch my stick, John, not the bladder, the oak one. I want to show you where I go to spend Sundays when God and my legs are on speaking terms. You go up the hill. Behind the palace, behind the gardens and the orchard, the park rises in long grass and hawthorn toward the ridge, and on the crown of it stands the old tower, Duke Humphrey's Tower, grey and half-kept, built by the same duke who built the first palace below more than a century past. It takes the better part of an hour, the 2 of you and the oak stick, stopping at every third hawthorn, larks going up out of the grass, the sweat sweet and clean for once, nothing like the sweat of galleries, and then the ridge and the wind off the estuary, and Will sits down on the fallen sill-stone by the tower door like a man taking his own chair at his own table, and you turn around and England is lying at your feet. The palace below, red brick and glass, small as a toy of itself, the tilt-yard, the orchard, the dead friary, all of it holdable in one hand. The river taking its great bend around the marshes, silver-brown, crowded with sails, ships standing down on the ebb for the sea, ships coming up on old tides from Spain and the Baltic and the Indies, wherries like water-flies stitching bank to bank. Down river, the masts at Deptford and the king's ships riding at anchor. And up river, far off, under its own brown grey lid of smoke, London, the bridge a grey thread, pulls spire a needle against the haze, 500 feet of it, and you think of a man lying on a rope at the top of it with his arms spread, and of heads on the southern gate you decided not to look at and looked at, and of a room behind that haze where a narrow man keeps 2 books. There it is, Will says, the whole shop. The wind moves in the grass. He is quiet a long while, and when he talks again it is in the voice from the stairs, the looks-like-rain voice, which you know now to be the voice he keeps for the truest things. "I have stood in the middle of it, John, as middle as a man can stand, close enough to the crown to hear it creak, for 21 years, and from down there you cannot see it at all. You see the next face, the next supper, the next winter. From up here you can see what it actually is. It is a river with some brick beside it. It was here before Harry, God rest him, and it will be here when the boy is old, and when the boy's grandchildren are old, and every soul in that smoke down there, every duke and every waterman, every fowler and every nan and every fool is aboard for one tide only, one ebb and one flood each. He turns the oak stick slowly under his palms. You're the least thing in that whole picture, boy. A speck. And you are in the picture, which is more than all the men who are not born yet and all the men in the churchyards can say. Both of us. Specks in the finest picture ever painted with our one tide running. That is either nothing or everything, and a wise man decides which one time, early, and never reopens the question. He points the stick down at the palace, at one small window in the eastern range that you know as well as your own hands. When the day comes that I'm not funny, and you tell me so, and you will, because I bought your truth with my own coin, and it's the best purchase I ever made, I'll not cling. I'll ask the boy's leave, and I'll go up to my kinsman's house in Shoreditch, and keep hens, and be an alderman of nothing, and tell lies about kings to anyone who'll stand still. A fool who knows when to leave the room, John. That is the rarest timing in the whole trade. Every jest is knowing when to stop. So is every life. He levers himself up off the sill-stone, one hand on your shoulder, the weight of it as familiar now as your own bones, and stands a last moment looking at the water. But not this year, he says, and the quick brown eyes are laughing an hour ahead of the rest of him, the way they were the first morning you ever saw them. This year there's a child down there who laughed at my bow, and a line in a book that held, and a new reign wants old jokes retold to people too young to have heard them. The shop is open, come on. Downhill is the knees' favourite direction they can carry me for once. After the hill, something shifts. Not dramatically. Nothing you could point to and say, there. That is when it changed. But the year finds a new rhythm, and the weeks begin to run together like drops on glass. The summer of 1547 goes by in green and gold. The young king comes down to Greenwich, and the palace fills with tutors and preachers, and new men with new manners, soberer coats, longer sermons, and through it all the old fool threads his way with his simpler tools, the tumbling dogs, the wonders, the hunt for the wisest head in the room, and the boy's laugh, rationed by his gravity, is worth more at that court than plate. The Lord Protector governs all, the king's uncle, Somerset now, and Will observes in your hearing only, never in the halls, that England is now governed by a Somerset and amused by a Somers, and men had best mind the spelling, for the difference is the difference between the axe and the bladder. You laugh. He doesn't. He is watching the new great men the way he watched the old, reading the weather a year out, an old pilot who has seen this river drown better boats. You turn 15 with the hay. Fowler pays out midsummer quarter in coins worse than ever, and enters the fool's wood and candle without comment in the new book, the long count of quarters growing quietly by one, and one more. Nan's rosemary bushes come into their small blue flower, and the shirts smell of it all summer. Tom's new boy learns to stack bark up, and stops wobbling, and begins, insufferably, to govern a boy newer still. The plaster goes on warm each night, wool above and below, not too tight, your hands doing it now without your mind, the way Nan folds sheets. The rattle keeps its 3 dry voices. The split pea lives in your own chest, knotted in a rag, in the corner of your own box beside your first year's savings, and some nights, checking it is there, you hold it in your palm a moment, half a dried pea from a dead king's last winter, the whole history of a strange office in half a hollow seed. And you cannot possibly explain to anyone why you would not trade it for the plate wall at Hampton Court. On quiet evenings, when the shutters are up and the supper is cleared and Will is sleeping the thin early sleep of the old with the spaniel guarding his shin, you sometimes sit on the truckle bed a while before you lie down, in the last grey of the light, and let the year walk back through you. The knees on the stairs and the ledger that did not strike, the garden and the roar, knave, arrant knave, and the little mild voice from the grass that broke the fever of a kingdom. The woman in the chair at Smithfield you never saw and will never stop seeing. The wax face going by high over black velvet, and the fist closed round 4p of true silver. Patch, weeping among 6 yeomen, 20 years loved and 1 autumn undone. Jane at the torches, never once afraid. The boy under the crown, laughing with both hands over his mouth. There is a whole world in this room, you think. A coat on a peg that knows a dead king. A stool worth nothing, worth everything. A bladder 3 peas. Yeah, the tide, breathing in the shutter, gaps. And through the wall, slow, and even now, the breathing of the last man in England whose whole estate is laughter, sleeping sound in a palace where they kept him, where against every rule of this hard place the nothing man grew old. And on one of those evenings, with your eyes already closing, it arranges itself in you, simple as one of Jane's sayings, the answer you have been living inside since a March morning of bells and bad knees. What happens to a court jester when he grows old is what happens to every one of us, exactly that, no more. The knees go, the wit slows a half beat, then a beat. The world changes masters around him, and then it comes down to what it always comes down to, whether anyone in the room remembers laughing, whether anyone's hand is under him when he cannot rise from the stool, whether he is written into somebody's book, somebody's prayers, somebody's evening. He is kept, or he is not. He was loved, or he was inventory. That narrow, that real, and you, 15, with your whole tide before you, resolve, in the last soft minute before sleep, to be, whatever else you become, one of the hands, one of the keepers. It seems, on the edge of dreams, the only office in the world worth holding. You do not yet know the rest of it, and it is better so. You do not know that the grave boy will have only 6 years of his reign, or what Englands will burn and rebuild after him, or that through all of it, through the boy and the boy's fierce sister and the years beyond, the old man behind the wall will simply go on, kept in book after book, reign after reign, the one line no auditor ever questioned, until he walks, white-haired and slow, at the edge of one last coronation, while a red-haired queen goes by, and then takes his own leave at last in his own bed in Shoreditch, an old, old man, full of years, which is a thing that almost no one who stood close to that crown in your lifetime will manage to do. The Jesters had no pension, no guild, no land, and yet the softest death of all the men of that terrible court belongs to the fool. Hold that tonight. Of all of them, the dukes and chancellors and bishops in their furs, it was the man with the pig's bladder who died old and warm and missed. But that is all far down river. Tonight there is only this room. The candle is out. The rushes breathe their green and sour breath. The tide is coming up in the dark outside. You can hear it arriving in the smell of the air. Mud giving way to salt. The river turning over in its bed the way you are turning in yours. The spaniel has left the king's hearth again, padding across the boards, and settles its warm weight against your legs with a sigh older than palaces. 2 floors up, a child king is sleeping under guard. Through the wall, an old fool is sleeping under nothing but a line of ink, and it is enough. It has been enough for 21 years, and you are warm enough under the blanket with the dog. You're fed enough, bread and pottage and the heel of a Sunday pie. You're safe enough behind the board you sleep against, in the palace by the river, in the keeping of people who would miss you. Warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. In the year 1547, in any year, in your year, that is not a small fortune. That is the whole of one. Tomorrow there will be water to carry up from the conduit, and charcoal to fetch while Tom's apprentice governs his newer boy, and a plaster to warm to the exact heat that eases. Tomorrow there will be a supper, and the stool to carry, and a room to read, and perhaps the rhyming game made kind and slow for a 9-year-old, and the old dry rattle of 3 Ps. Tomorrow the bells, the tide, the stairs, counted silently by 2 people who love each other in the manner of this hard place, which is to say, in services rendered and truths told and nothing ever said. But that's tomorrow. Let it come. Let it come slowly, the way the flood comes up the reach, without hurry, sure of itself, lifting all the boats in the dark. Let the palace settle, beam by beam, tick by tick, into the night. Let the last footsteps die away down the gallery. Let the watch call midnight at the gates and go by. Let the river breathe, in and hold and out, the way an old man breathes behind a wall when his knees have finally let him be. Let your own thoughts slow now, and soften and stop striving. Like a rattle set down on a chest, like a coat hung on its peg, like a stool standing quiet by a banked fire, off duty until morning. Centuries will pass. The palace of Placentia, every brick of it you know, the eastern range, the tilt yard, the little chamber, will be pulled down to the ground, and great white stone courts for old sailors will rise where you are lying this minute. On the hill where you stood with Will among the larks, they will build a house for watching the stars, and a strange thing will happen there. The whole turning world will come to set its clocks by that hilltop, by a line drawn through the very grass you climbed, so that every hour ever kept, anywhere, forever after, passes through the park at Greenwich on its way to you. The bridge will lose its houses, then its heads, then its old bones entirely. The testoons will go into museums with their blushing noses on display. And in a great library in London, under glass, in a room where the light is kept low, a psalter will lie open, and in the margin, small and bright and forever, a heavy old king will be playing on his harp, and near him, in a green coat, hollow-cheeked, unmistakable, one particular fool will be standing, still there, still in the book. You can go and see him any day you like. Ink outlasts favour. It has outlasted everything else, but people will not change. People will still stand too close to power and pay for it, and stand just far enough away and be spared. People will still carry the stool for someone they love and call it a job. People will still need, in every hard room, in every hard century, one voice that is allowed to say the true thing, and will still be surprised at how often it belongs to the person everyone had agreed was nothing. And old men with worn knees will still be worth exactly what the people around them remember. No more, no less, in this and every age. Some things don't change. The keeping doesn't change. So let go now. All of it. The court, the coins, the books, the year. Let sleep take you the way the ebb took the wherries down the reach at evening, one by one, lights out home. Let the bells fade. Let the rushes and the rosemary and the river mud fade. Let the old man's breathing through the wall carry you slow and even and unafraid, the breathing of a fool who grew old. In a world where fools were never supposed to grow old, and did it anyway, laughing, a half-beat late. You've earned this rest. You carried everything they gave you, all year, up all those stairs, and none of it ever got lighter, and you carried it anyway. Take it now, set it down, and dream of whatever dreams may come. Good night.